Welcome, welcome. This is Kim Ades from Frame of Mind Coaching, and I am the host of Resilience Radio, where I interview guests who are professionals at crushing the tough stuff. Today, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce this guest that I met just a few weeks ago at an HR event. Her name is Alyssa Clark, and she is what is it, Alyssa? The head of talent, director, recruiting, and talent at a company called Eyemart Express. Alyssa, welcome.
Thanks, welcome. Kim. I'm so happy to be here.
So, you know what? One of the questions we ask before we even show up on these calls is like, what's a challenge you're dealing with professionally? And you answered ghosting. Yes. What does that even mean?
Oh, man. So I'm sure people are mostly familiar with it from a dating context in terms of romantically, you set up plans to go meet somebody and either they're a no-show, standing you up, or you actually just have a complete drop-off in your communication. So the texts fall off, the calls stop coming, and we refer to that in the dating world as ghosting. Right. And I see a parallel in today's talent space, now overseeing that entire function and really looking at attraction and selection of great talent. I've been ghosted now professionally a couple times in terms of had a great rapport with a candidate, thought we sold the organization well, really seemed to be a culture fit, and, ended up just not showing up for an interview. Most recently, a last interview where we had already talked comp and onboarding and all that good stuff. So, really that war for talent is something that's really keeping me up at night, and particularly feeling like I'm getting stood up a little bit in terms of getting someone to join our organization. So that's kind of where we're at today in terms of the ghosting epidemic.
Okay, so let's just go back for a minute. So as the director, again, you have a very fancy title of recruiting talent at Eyemart Express. Eyemart is what, like a place that sells glasses? I'm trying to simplify here so everybody can understand.
Totally. So think about us just as, our typical retail business, and our product are glasses. So we sell beautiful boutique eyewear. We have some of the best trendy fashions that you've ever seen, plug intended. And we also have exceptional service and speed. So we can sometimes get your glasses out as quick as 30 minutes or less. So it's a pretty awesome company focused on customer experience. And, I'm all about experience. So it made sense for me to come home here.
Okay, so and you're responsible for recruiting who? Like frontline store staff all the way up to?
Oh, yeah.
Just fill me in.
Yeah, so my team is responsible, if you think about it from the standpoint of everything that has to do with employee experience. So me and my team, we focus on attraction. So what does our brand look like in the marketplace? What are we doing to actually get our name out there? We then go to selection. So we're doing the actual interviewing, recruiting for everything from our retail associates and lab technicians in Dothan, Alabama, to our, senior vice president of real estate and development here at the home office. So my team is so incredible. We have years of experience in our CPO, Jenna Venturi, who leads us fearlessly, and my team who really execute on the day-to-day, as many as 200 open requisitions at one time. Trying to get all the best talent in here and making sure that they stay, because that's something that the second half of my job kicks into, is developing and keeping our people. So that's really in a nutshell kind of the space that we're in and the types of roles. And overall, it's just such a fun challenge for us to tackle.
Okay, so let's just talk about this whole idea of attraction. What is it that you think attracts employees these days? Like, what are the key elements that you are selling? Like,
absolutely.
And I'm really asking from the standpoint of, if I were listening and I owned a company, big or small, what do I need to be considering in the war for talent?
Absolutely. And I'm not an expert at all, but I can tell you as a millennial, pseudo-successful individual, kind of what's important to me today and what I've heard from candidates that I've interacted with. And first and foremost, I think it comes down to intentionality. Intentionality today is so important. And I don't want that to be misconstrued for this kind of over-emotional sense of purpose that we hear kind of stereotypically associated with millennials. It pushes on that further. And it's actually something I coach a lot of my leaders here at this organization about. It's not just a sense of purpose in terms of being environmentally responsible or socially connected or motivated. It's more about, we want to be intentional with our time in an organization, and a new candidate coming in wants to understand, what does my day look like here? What am I doing to add value? And what does my long-term career here? Because in a world of options, Kim, as you know, when they can go out to 100 startups and get another position, what are we doing that makes us different? And I think the beautiful sell about Eyemart is that we are so intentional in terms of our product enables healthcare, right? Our product enables sight, and that is a critical sensory experience of the human experience, right? And that is something for me that stands out about our brand and about why I'm spending 40 plus, maybe closer to 60 some weeks, hours here at this organization, is because I help enable someone to help someone see. And that is something that I think transcends free food and experiences, and it has everything to do with what are you actually doing from a business and a product perspective every day.
So in other words, the attraction is when I think about joining a company, what am I joining to be a part of?
Yeah, and you know me, Kim. I mean, from our conversations, the biggest thing for me is I don't ever want someone to participate in their own career, right? You should not be participating in your own life. You should not be participating in your own career. You should be driving it, right? You're in the driver's seat. And if there's ever a point in time where you feel like you're that passenger, something needs to change, right? Something I coach my sisters on all the time is thinking about their future is you don't want to participate in your own life.
So I want to pause because you kind of mentioned it in passing. You're a millennial. You're 27 years old.
Sure am.
And you're, an executive in a pretty formidable company. How many people are there at Eyemart?
We're currently sitting at about 1,700 employees, so still in that small to mid-size range, but we are growing like crazy, opening 25 stores this year and on track to continue doing so. So growing like crazy.
So how does a 27-year-old get a job like this? And I'm asking for two reasons.
Sure.
Number one is there are other 27-year-olds listening going, how do I get to a position like that? But
Right.
The other reason is, as an employer, should I be looking for a 27-year-old to take on a senior position?
Right.
Can I feel comfortable with that? Is this an unusual 27-year-old?
Yeah.
Or are there other 27-year-olds like you?
No, I think it's a great question, Kim. And, I would hope my previous bosses, I wish they could be on the call to give you a better answer, because obviously I'm going to be subjective and I'm terrible at talking about myself. But if I were to answer, I think I'd answer with two things. So I think one is something I'm very proud of myself is that I have a ton of grit. I don't think there is someone who could say about me that I don't roll up my sleeves, get scrappy when I need to, and that my grit wavers. That is something about me that if I commit to something, my word is everything, and I will lose sleep over not fulfilling, if it's sending you a card on your birthday or if it's, proposing a $2 million proposal that's going to generate X revenue and making sure we get those results, right? So for me, I think my grit is everything, and it translates into my integrity, and that's just something that I refuse to compromise on.
Do you think that's a millennial trait, or is that just an Alyssa Clark trait?
I wish I had the answer to that. I think it's definitely an Alyssa Clark trait, 100%. But what I do think that you have coming into the workforce now are a group of people who are hungry and desperate for meaning and for connection and for feeling. Because what I think has happened due to the way we were socialized and brought up as a generation is that we lost touch with the human-human interaction. We lost touch with how our words make someone feel. I think we lost touch a bit with how saying something to someone's face and having to watch them sit with that hurt feeling can make us feel in return. So I think, as Simon Sinek says, the burden of helping groom and bring on that next generation of leaders is falling on corporate America, and it's falling on organizations to help wake people up and shake them a bit. The millennials are there. They're faster. They are hungry. They have access to technology and ways of doing things that used to take years and processes that used to take multiple touch points. But now we also just have more of a human problem where it's about teaching these very capable workers how to actually have meaning in what they do and how to actually understand that impact is more than, again, free food in a break room or comfortable ergonomic seating in an office. It's really about understanding.
Let's talk about grit for a minute. So as a recruiter, how do you evaluate whether or not someone has grit?
I think it's the little stuff, right? I think it's a little stuff in terms of, an email doesn't go without an acknowledgement, Whether it's just a simple thank you, or I've received this, or thank you so much for your time. Those little indicators, just like a handshake in an in-person interaction or eye contact in an interpersonal interaction, those are the things that make or break it for me. Those are the indicators of larger behaviors that I can pick up on pretty quickly.
But is that grit, or is that, EQ, kind of like a social intelligence?
No, because I think it's discipline, Kim. I think it's about the people who have the endurance to keep up in today's world, and to keep and not compromise on those little things, and not let the speed and the volume, especially in recruiting, right? Not let the speed and the volume compromise the quality of that interaction, because in recruiting, you are the front line. You are the first impression, right? I want someone, as my personal mantra, my thing is that I want everyone to be better after interacting with me. Whether that means I help coach you to a new career path, whether I just gave you a smile and a warm handshake and said good morning to you, whatever that looks like, I want your experience with me to always be positive and help you be better. So I think it's keeping that grit comes in of not losing those little things. Even though you've got big projects, big stress, big responsibility, you don't lose sight of the details.
Okay, so let me ask you a tactical question here.
Yeah.
If someone comes in for an interview with you, is it their job to send you an email to say thank you for the interview, or is it your job to say thank you for coming in for an interview?
That's a great question, Kim. I think, best case scenario is you literally have one of those beautiful jinx moments and you've sent it at the same time. That's a match made in heaven, right? When you inboxes line up like that. But I think, honestly, as an employer, I want to be the one reaching out first. I want to be the one setting that expectation and showing what kind of integrity we have first and foremost. Now, do I have the expectation of someone who would come work for my organization or work for me would do that small detail as well? Absolutely. And if they didn't do it, would I say it's a deal breaker? 9 times out of 10, yes.
Wow. Okay. And what if this candidate is clearly not a good fit for your organization? Do you still send it out?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because again, it goes back to intentionality, right? I am intentional with my time every day. From when I wake up, what I do at that time. It's actually my CEO, Michael Bender. I wanted to go back and teach some classes this fall. And he looked at me and he's like, if you make this choice, Alyssa, either way, he said, if you choose to teach them, great. If you choose not to, what are you going to do with that time, right? What are you going to do with that time that you would have spent educating others? Do something for yourself, start a pet project. What are you going to do with that? And that really stuck with me. So I absolutely think being intentional and coming in for an interview and spending your time with me, which is why I have such a problem with ghosting, that means a lot to me. And I do think I need to acknowledge that. Absolutely.
Okay, so go back to ghosting. Why do you think ghosting happens in this day and age?
I think, again, it goes back to, unfortunately, this kind of zombie-like epidemic we're in, where we can just go through the motions and we don't have that real-life context or experience to understand how your actions have affected others, right? This person had no idea that the actions of not showing up for that interview. I had already kind of started talking about this candidate with my larger business partner team. I had already started making plans of office relocation, and not that I wouldn't have had to do those things otherwise, but there are other impacts that from that absence really not only was an attempt to make me more jaded, I think, and could have caused me to become hardened or more cynical. It's one impact, but the second one is just the organization and the investment that we had already made in trying to bring this person in. There's dollars and time and resources that went into that. So I think it's maybe this just gross neglect, unfortunately, again, from not having as much interpersonal connection and having the right conversations, that this person and others who are guilty of it don't understand the impact you're having. And it's actually a longer term detriment to your career, because your brand, your name is everything. And if this person came to interview for me again, or a friend of mine, which, I'm very fortunate to have connections all over, I'm sure they would think twice about engaging with this person.
Okay. So you mentioned also that you teach. So you have this executive role in a company and you teach. What do you teach and where do you teach it?
Yeah, so I've started teaching. I'm on pause now, but I started teaching at San Diego State. I was actually super fortunate in my master's program to be awarded an opportunity to teach as instructor of record for about 4 or 5 classes, and I taught Intro to Literature, which is my favorite. I'm a huge Gothic novel junkie and also a Jane Austen scholar, so 2 kind of very disparate worlds, but in something in both of those, I think it's just the position of the female perspective, and the Gothic novel really lends itself to a lot of sensibilities and thoughts and feelings that I think I bring to the corporate space, that sense of enlightening people, awakening them, wanting to almost scare them sometimes into thinking for themselves and thinking more critically. That's what I love about Austen and the Gothic novel both, is they force the reader to actually wake up and be present in what's happening, not just in the plot line, but then to look around them. And one of my favorite parts is suburban Gothic literature. Particularly, I grew up behind the Orange Curtain, so to speak, in Orange County, California, and sometimes the scariest stuff was happening right behind, literally, the Pearl Gates right next door to us, right? Sometimes in those beautiful suburban houses, worse things were happening than, out walking home at dark after work one day. So I think that is where my love of teaching came in. I started, like I said, at college level. I was 21, teaching my first class as instructor of record, having returned Iraq war vets in my class, 60-year-old beautiful woman who was, coming back to finish her degree because she wanted to show her granddaughter what it's like to finish something. And I thought, who am I to be standing up here and be responsible for imparting knowledge on these people? But it was actually...
So what was that like, being 21? How did your students react to this young person standing in front of them?
I remember it so well, and it will always be one of my favorite moments of walking into that room. Smelled like chalk at an old school chalkboard, and the door was in the back of the room, and I was late trying to find my keys, and it was one of those, first day jitter things. And when I walked into the room was mostly full, and I remember as I continued to make my way from the back of the room towards the front, the eyes started getting a little heavier on me in terms of, I think they were looking for me to sit down rather than continue walking to the front of the room.
Right.
And I got to the front of the room, and I remember turning around and just looking at everyone staring at me. And I loved that feeling of just, these people are shocked that I am qualified to stand here. And I can't wait to push them and challenge them. And at the end of this semester, have them be like, wow, I so misjudged this first day. I had no idea what was in store for me, and I thrived on that.
So it didn't freak you out that people were thinking, like, who are you, this young kid standing in front of me?
I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I think I love that ability of just being the person, again, to make someone better, to make them rethink their own stereotype or their own assumption or their own judgment that they placed on me before I opened my mouth or before they saw my passion for what I do. I love that experience, and I'm addicted to it, quite honestly.
Wow. Okay, so clearly, audience members, people who are listeners, you're listening into to a conversation with an extraordinary human being who looks at the world just a little bit differently. But let's take a sharp right turn right now. You looking back on your life, 27 years, what would you say was your greatest adversity?
Oh man, greatest adversity would have to be, Kim, I was, in my personal life, I would say I'd start there. I was so fortunate to, at 11 years old, be brought to a new family. And I had lived my first 11 years of my life with my 2 biological parents, no siblings. And it was not a healthy or happy space at all. It was incredibly difficult, incredibly challenging, and was the lowest point, I think, of my experience so far. And then,
so what was going on that made it hard?
Yeah, we had 2 addicts in the house who, addiction is a terrible, filthy, awful, ugly beast, and really took both of them away from me. There really wasn't an opportunity for a relationship because they had a relationship with something that it was much bigger than me. And that took me a long time to understand. But as a kid, it was pretty crushing to just feel completely displaced and less important to an inanimate bottle or, a vial of some substance.
So at 10 years old, what was life like? Did you come home?
Yeah.
Were your parents just totally gone? Did you need to make your own dinner? Like, what was it like?
Yeah, it was pretty brutal. I mean, my father was a very successful businessman. He was an executive for a pretty big brand, and he was traveling quite often. I mean, he was probably home a week out of the month. And my biological mother was around. She was a stay-at-home mom and was very good at staying at home and doing anything she could to not be a mom. And it was a lot of, me walking to school, me getting to school, me having sports practice, staying for academic decathlon, doing every club, every volunteer thing, staying at school as long as I possibly could to not be home. And it was also super lonely in the sense of it was very hard to make friends. I attempted to make friends and we'd have play dates and they'd want to come to my house and that couldn't happen, right? So it was a lot of lying and covering things up and, bruises and having to make up stories. Thank God I played sports, so that made it easy. But it was rough.
Wait. Bruises because the alcohol caused violence?
Yeah, there's definitely physical violence that no child should have to go through. And also terrible, just emotional and psychological, difficult stuff around, I'd come home from school, for example, and there'd be, food in the fridge and tons stocked pantry and the house would be clean. And I'd go up to my room and there'd be hundreds of dollars from Nordstrom's of new clothes on my bed. And I'd be like, wow, we're having a good day today. So I'd go cut all the tags off, right? Put them in color order in my closet. And then, would be confronted by my mother later that evening of, you're so selfish, you're so entitled thinking these clothes are for you. And why did you cut the tags off? I was going to return them. And it would then be an excuse for a much larger violent episode. And it was those things for a long time that just really messed with my sense of love and showing love. And, what are those languages of love? Is it gifts? Is it touch? Is it, quality time? Is it words of affirmation? What is it? Because I'm not getting any of it. So books really became that salvation for me of trying to teach myself what real morals, values, those feelings were. But it was a pretty lonely experience those first 11 years.
So then what happened? You switched like something,
Yeah.
So what happened there?
Literally, a walk up my driveway. It's literally as simple as that. I was walking up my driveway and our neighbors to the left-hand side of us were moving in. A beautiful young family, beautiful woman. She's probably in her, I know how old she was. I won't say because she'll be mad at me. Two young girls and a husband who was about to be deployed to Iraq. And we made eye contact and we made small talk conversation a couple times up that walk on the driveway, coincidentally on the way home from school. And then it turned, after about a week of small talk, to a job offer and her asking if I'd like to come over and help out with her two little ones and do, the dinner bedtime routine. And she'd pay me like $10 an hour. And I was thinking, the entrepreneur in me is like, oh, hell yeah, I'll do that. Mm-hmm. So I started spending time over there. And of course now, not to spoil the story, but there was probably some deductive reasoning there and some context clues of her trying to get me to spend more time over there and not in the house. So anyway, that quickly turned to, a year of from 11 to 12, really helping every night with bedtime routine and reading stories, having dinner. And then it turned to a woman, Rena, saying, hey, why don't you stay and let's watch America's Next Top Model together, or let's watch American Idol, or do you want to hang out and do you have homework you want to do? And I have some work I can do. And her husband was just deployed at the time as well. So we really became best friends and and she was just there. And then from 12 to 13, it was holidays were there, and we went on family trips together, and I was in family pictures. And by the time we looked up and I was 13 years old, we were looking at each other, and my mom approached me and she was just like, I love you. I feel like you're the piece of our family in my heart that was missing. How do you feel? And I remember
your
that
mom, meaning Rena, not your biological mom.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, Rena, and her approaching me and her asking me, right? I was like, that's amazing. You're asking me if I feel it's mutual, right? And I told her, of course I did, and it felt like home. And my sisters I had fallen in love with, obviously, and that home felt safe, and we had this beautiful, beautiful connection with the four of us. And she basically said, I'm ready for a fight if you are. And I said, hell yeah, let's do it. And then from there, we approached my biological parents, and we entered into an agreement that I was going to be full-time with Rena and, that chapter of my life living with my biological parents was over and that it was non-negotiable. And at that point in time, my biological dad actually left for rehab about 6 months after that conversation. So pretty immediate if you think about it. And my biological mother had relocated. He relocated her to Las Vegas, Nevada, last time I heard. And that's the last update that I've had on her formally in terms of where she is. And my dad's a different story.
Okay, so hold on a second. I just want to go back. When you approached your biological parents and said, I want to go live with Rena full time, how did they react? Did they say, like, yeah, sure, see you later? Or did they say, are you crazy? Or did they say, hold on a minute, we want $1 million for this? Like, what did it look like?
I love that you think I'm worth $1 million. I'll take that. Kim, I wish, I'm sure it would save me a lot of money in therapy and whatnot if I could have that perspective of my biological mother and understand what she was thinking, because it's heartbreaking, but it was an easy choice for her. It seemed like she was very clear and satisfied with her other priorities. So that was a pretty easy moment for her, at least from my perspective and where I sat as a, very emotional 13-year-old who's trying to just survive and rebuild herself. For my biological dad, for him, I think it was much deeper. I do think in there is someone who does really love me and really care for me, but I think that he doesn't understand what that means, and he doesn't know how to cope with that responsibility. And that's, I think, where he's turned to other coping mechanisms that haven't been healthy for him. But I do think it resonated with him. I do think it hit him because, like I said, 6 months after he was in rehab, he worked that program. And up until about 6 months ago, he had been sober for 10 years. Mm-hmm. So I do think that moment, I hope if he was on your show, Kim, and you asked him that question, I hope he would say that moment. That would give me so much joy to know that that meant something to him. Mm-hmm. But that's from where I sat. That's kind of what I think happened to them. For me, I was sweaty palms, nervous. Rena, I was just holding her hand and ready for her just to fight. I think she was disappointed there wasn't a fight because clearly she was willing to do so. Mm-hmm. But it was the best thing that could have ever happened. The hardest thing I've ever gone through, but the best thing that could have ever happened to me.
So have you spoken to your mother since then? Like, have you tried to contact her? Has she tried to contact you? I mean, she was living next door. Didn't she see you?
I mean, no, my dad had her out of there. My biological dad had her out of there pretty quickly. So it wasn't terribly awkward. She was local for a bit. So yeah, it was awkward at times, but Rena was very protective and made it very easy to feel safe. So when I was in my bachelor's program, I was in a pretty intensive therapy session at that time. And my therapist recommended, a reconnection and just me being able to kind of close the loop, get everything off my chest and do all of that. And so I arranged he was my boyfriend at the time, turned into be my first husband. We arranged a trip to go out to Las Vegas to confront her. We drove out there. We got there. 5 hours from San Diego. Got there, and my grandparents could not produce her. And we waited and waited and waited, and she could not be produced. And then my biological grandmother, who those two are a whole nother, a whole nother story, but they couldn't produce her, and they said that it was too much for her and it caused her to have a breakdown and that she wasn't going to be able to meet that day. Mm-hmm. So that was the time where I realized, wow, not only have I given 11 years and now given, some of my adult energy and life to this, but I'm done at this point. So at that day was my last attempt at initiating any conversation with either of them, my grandparents or my biological mother, and drove back to San Diego and never looked back, as kind of cinematic as you can imagine that looking. That's literally how I felt.
Now, did she expect you to come? Like, did she know you were coming?
Apparently through my grandmother, she was coordinating that. And
okay.
Yes, I had been copied on, we had emails at the time going back, and I had seen her email address on there, and we had spoken on the phone, not my biological mother, but my grandmother and I could hear her in the background. So I'm sure she was aware.
Okay. So, and as you left there and you said, I'm done, was that a relief or a heartbreaking experience?
I think both, of course, right? For me, I think something for me I've always struggled with, which is why I love being an achiever, is rejection and abandonment. And it felt like at that time that, it was both. I had that last rejection from her that I almost needed in a sense, just to know that I had exhausted everything. And this goes back to grit, actually, that I am someone, I exhaust every option before I give up on someone. And that's a pro of me and it's a con of me. It's funny, I work in talent, right? So performance management and stuff, corporate wise, I give up. It takes a lot for me to give up on someone. So in that moment, leaving Las Vegas and driving home, I felt like I needed that last rejection, that last bit of my heart to break and fall so I could heal and I could be stronger and more resilient, pun intended, from it. And it served me well. I think it gave me a strength and a closure that I needed.
And your dad, you were in touch with him. In fact, I think, if I remember correctly, you invited him to live with you for a few years.
Did. Yeah, I did.
So what happened?
Yeah, so we reconnected when I was in San Diego during college, and he was there after his rehab program and was able to kind of live sober and live with my grandfather and kind of build his life up a bit. And so we were actually reconnected through college, and then I picked up and moved to Dallas again with my previous first husband. We're since divorced, but with Dan and I moved out to Dallas. And about a year in, my dad was kind of transient. He's looking for what's next for him, and Dallas was way more cost effective than San Diego. So we started floating, feelers out of how about if we teamed up and lived together, and I could be with you full time. We could build a relationship. We can get a house, and I'll help take care of the dog and the yard and all this stuff. And at the time, it felt like, he was having all these health problems. He had a aortic aneurysm that really scared us. He got diagnosed with COPD, and I just felt so helpless with him in California, and I still felt the sense of responsibility for him. So Dan and I at the time, we made the decision to bring him out, and he lived with us for about 2.5 years. He was there while I got a divorce from Dan. He was there about even 4 months into me having a new relationship with someone else, and then that ending, and then he was there for the holidays together with me. And then it was just this last October that unfortunately we had a relapse in my home, and it was one of those things where I had to ask myself, is this something that I feel safe in? Is this something that I can live with? And the answer was no. The answer was going back to a rehab program, or it's you can't live here anymore. And I came home from work after that tough conversation, and he had packed up everything, and he had just left with no note, no forwarding address, not so much as a text. And that's the last that I've spoken to him since this last October.
So it feels like you have to deal with this over and over and over again.
Oh, yeah. And I think, that's maybe what, endurance and grit is it's just, at what point is it your own fault, which is something I struggle with, right? At what point is it your own fault because you allow certain people to keep disappointing you? But on the other side of that is, what if one day they actually show up for you? And that's I don't have the answer to that. That's something that I'm still exploring every day.
Well, from a coaching standpoint, I mean, the word disappointment is interesting, right? So people disappoint you because you have a certain expectation of them, right? And so, what would it be like to be in a relationship without really any expectation? It's tough to do that.
Sure.
And so, it's just an interesting question to put on the table that says, okay, well, you know what? We did reunite. We did reconnect. We did have a good relationship for a while. And because I care for him and love him and stand for his health, this was the decision I made. Good for me, good for him. And it's now in his hands. And I am, I don't actually have control. And this is part of what we teach a lot of our clients. What do you have control over?
Right.
Fortunately, a lot of people want to have control over the behavior of others. Right. But it's impossible to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe that's why I have such this love and I just have the purest love I feel, and the most positive source of motivation for me are my two younger sisters and my younger brother. And I wonder when I look at them that I think maybe you're on there, Kim, onto something I need to sit with, because for them, I don't have set expectations. I have infinite expectations, and that makes it so much easier for me just to love and support them unconditionally, because I know they're capable of so much, but I don't have a fixed idea of what that looks like. Of course, I expect them to be respectful and kind and have integrity, but I would, if they came to me and MS came tomorrow and said, I want to move to Zimbabwe and, be an archaeologist, and I don't have any plan, but I'm going, here's my game plan, and I'll call you every Tuesday. I would, love her and make sure she got all her immunizations and send her on her way. You know what I mean?
Right.
So maybe there's something there to sit with.
Well, and here's the thing is that, the idea of having expectations of someone else means their job is to do something for me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's a bit of a trap we fall into. And the trap is that we hand over our emotional state to someone else and their behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
So really, truly, the reason that your dad, struggled is because he was struggling.
Right.
Nothing to do with you. It's not, and he probably couldn't deal with the idea of even disappointing you. So he ran away. Right. So, and I don't know your dad, so
Sure.
I'm guessing, but his actions were really about him.
Right. No,
right.
You're absolutely
Except it's hard not to take it personally. It's hard to do that.
Absolutely.
Okay. So as we're rounding the corner for this interview, you have a coach on the line.
Yes.
Think about what is your greatest challenge now and what question do you have for this coach?
So, Kim, I need help with probably this question of what is a pitfall that you see young, fearless female leaders take that could be avoided?
Well, the word fearless is interesting because I don't see a lot of young, fearless females. Right? So the fact that there is a young, fearless female in front of me is very interesting. And I saw you in person and I saw your presentation. And by the way, this presentation was really interesting because it was like a two-woman presentation with you, the Millenial, and the what is it? The EVP of HR or the CHRO?
Our Chief People Officer, Jenna.
Yeah, who is not a millennial. And it was a conversation about, how do we hire, keep, and nurture millennials? And it was her perspective and your perspective. Right. And so, in front of me, I saw this powerhouse, meaning you, this super intelligent, well-spoken, extremely driven, unbelievable woman in front of me, right? But I also saw like a little bit of frustration. I'm frustrated with the way the world is and treats millennials. Mm-hmm. And so the pitfall is that frustration. The pitfall is, hey, I want to be seen and treated differently. And that can create friction and not the friction you want. Right. So the pitfall is like that all your passion and vigor and determination and drive creates anger for you sometimes. Because the world doesn't see things the way you do, and that anger doesn't necessarily move the needle where you want it to.
Absolutely. No, I think that's spot on because I am frustrated with the state of the world. I'm frustrated at, like I said, the passivity that seems to be plaguing all of us. And I think that's really fair feedback.
Well, and here's the thing, right? So if you were a coaching client of mine, I would say, so your anger can be useful as long as you don't sit in an angry spot for a long time, but rather identify what it is that you want as a result of feeling anger and move in that direction. So move towards what you want instead of staying in the place where you're focused on all the things that are wrong with the world. Right?
Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah, so it's literally turning yourself around, pivoting and saying, "Okay, I'm clear about what frustrates me." So that clarity serves as contrast and allows me to really get clear about what I would rather have. And I need to literally physically almost turn myself towards that and head in that direction. And if I don't, then I stay in the place of frustration and friction and I start kind of clashing with the world, which isn't, I don't think, at all what you want.
No, not at all. It's the question of what are you going to do about it, right? What are you going to do with it?
And it's interesting, right? And I talk about this all the time on this podcast and with my clients. Before I ask you, what are you going to do with it? I'm going to ask you, what are you going to think about it? Because first we think, then we do. And right now the thinking is things are wrong, bad, complacent, passive, etc. And that thinking doesn't get you to where you want to go. So how are you going to think about this in order to be able to take healthy, useful action that gets you where you want to go? So first, the question is, how are you going to think about this differently? Right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's focusing on, again, what your point about control, what's in your span of control.
Right. So I have one last question for you, one that I don't ask mostly anybody, but what's next for you? Like, what's on your agenda? Where are you going? What do you want to achieve? What change do you want to make in the world?
Man, that is a huge question. Couple buckets. One, personal. I am in this amazing new relationship, and I am focusing on my personal life for a change and really making a commitment to that. I mean, I have this wonderful guy now. His name's Richard, and I really think that he's a contrarian like me. He's smart like me. He's driven like me. He's hardworking. He's got a story and substance to him, and not to mention he's really good looking. So overall, I'm just really pleased with where that's going. So hopefully, you'll get an update on that, Kim, and maybe a cute holiday card coming up pretty soon.
Amazing.
And then I think also personally, just my family, tons of time with family, making a lot more time and support for that this year. My sisters are both up in NorCal. My mom's in Palm Springs. So making time for them, and then see my little brother go off to college, and just know that all three of them are off doing incredible things will be so fulfilling. And then professionally, I think for me, what's next is even a broader role into more of the technology space. I'm really interested in the way that technology enables learning and enables our customer and employee experience. And I'm really thinking that there's a way there to leverage some of these disparate technologies that are out there a little bit more comprehensively to really help with process and things that we're having to do from a, siloed perspective, from HR to IT to learning and development. I really think there's a sweet spot there, and I want to explore that and kind of pioneer bringing people, process, and tech kind of all together. That's something that I'm interested in exploring. So
I have
I'll keep you
no
posted.
doubt that your work is going to affect a lot of companies, not just the one you're in. Alyssa, thank you so much for being with me, for sharing your story, for being so open and candid, and for being such an incredible millennial, an example to all. And honestly, it was an honor and a pleasure to have you on Resilience Radio today.
Thanks, Kim, so much. It was my absolute honor. And anytime you want me back, I'm in.
Okay, maybe we'll do it again. All right, until we meet again.